Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Unless this is your first time joining us here, in which case, hey, this is a channel where I give advice and tips for people looking to run tabletop RPGs like D&D and tell stories. I release stories on Saturdays, but since today is Friday, I have some DM advice for you all. And today, it's all about social encounters. If you're anything like me, social encounters can be difficult because it's hard often to know what to say in real life. So how can we do it in the context of a game where the situations are often very dramatic? Well, I'm going to try to answer that question today. So let's get started and let's learn something. My first point really takes advantage of the fact that this is a game that we usually only play once a week. What this means is that you have time to plan. The first thing that I do when I sit down to plan a social encounter is I list all the things that an NPC might want to get across, and that's my first point. Have a loose list of all the things that the NPC that you're going to be playing during this encounter might want to say or accomplish throughout it. Now, this list doesn't have to be and probably shouldn't be super extensive or anything like that. For example, if you have an NPC who decided to confront the players because they stole something from them, your list might include things like have the NPC accuse the players of stealing, have the NPC name the stolen object, and have the NPC present evidence. These are things that they're going to say throughout the conversation. You know what? Let's actually make this into a challenge. Take a scenario, either from one of your campaigns, a campaign you're in, a D&D stream you like. You can even pick a show or a movie or any of my stories that I've told or that example that I just gave. Doesn't matter as long as it has a social element to it. Take that scenario and pretend that it's an encounter that you're going to run. Pick a character and write down a few points that encompass things that they might say. Let me know what you come up with in the comments. I'm curious to see what you think. But keep in mind, not every NPC would interact in the same way, and not every situation will call for the same points. That's why at this stage, I like to keep these points very brief and very loose. They're just here to give you something to build off of. Not only does this help you so that you have a list of things to build off of in terms of what the NPC might say, but it also gives you something to work with when you actually start building the encounter. But more on that later. First, let's actually give the NPC some words. Don't be afraid to be thorough with it. Feel free to write a script for the NPC if you need to. You already know the basics of what they're going to say. Now, put it into words. Don't be too long-winded unless this particular NPC is a bit of a monologuist, in which case, sure, feel free to, but just be ready for the players to interrupt them. Try to be as concise as possible, but also try to be as true to the NPC as possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. For now, let me define real quick what I mean when I say script. I'm not saying to write out what the NPC will say and then leave little blank spots for your players, or even worse, try to control what your players might say and when they might say it. Don't try that. There's no way to predict exactly what your players are going to say or when they're going to say what they say. I know I say this for a lot of things when it comes to predicting what your players will do, but it's even more so here. Okay, you might be thinking, then how do I write a script for it? Just write down some things that your NPC might say, but don't stop there. Think of little things they might say that go with each of the points that you thought of earlier. Think of a few for each. Try to imagine what your players might say then and how your NPC might reply as best as you can. Just like I say for literally any other type of encounter, the inability to predict what a given player might do, or in this case say, does not mean that you don't plan. In fact, it means that you plan even more. I think about this whenever I get a chance to. This is one of those things that I like to just keep in the back of my mind. I run things through my head while I'm doing housework, on a walk, or even in the shower, and then I jot it down later. The reason for this is so that you have a lot to work with and pull from when the encounter actually happens. But there are a few considerations that you might think about while you're doing this. I've hinted this a few times earlier on in this video, but now I'm actually going to discuss it, and it is consider who the NPC is. This doesn't just affect how the NPC talks, but even more importantly, it affects what they say and how they say it. The first thing a lot of people worry about when planning for a social encounter is playing the NPC, what voice to give them, what mannerisms they might have, and sure, this stuff's important. I actually have a whole video about this, as well as a whole video on how you can make stats for NPCs. I'll leave a link in the card as always, so feel free to check that out if you want to. But today, we're talking about how to plan for what an NPC might say, since I personally think that for social encounters, this is much more important. So think, is this NPC really direct and no nonsense? Are they a people pleaser who uses flattery? Do they speak rudely and forcefully with lots of insults and little regard for who they're talking to? Are they arrogant? Are they self-absorbed? And the list goes on. All this will influence how they interact and what words they're going to actually say. And you know what? For a second challenge, I want you to take the character you chose earlier and replace them with a random NPC. Let's call him Earl. Give Earl a random personality trait and try to imagine how that might affect how he communicates. Write some possible lines of dialogue down for Earl if you want, and feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. And with that, we're at the final point. This one might be kind of obvious, so it won't be too long, but I thought I'd include it anyway. It's try to imagine where the social encounter might go. It's important with any encounter to imagine where it might end and how it might resolve so that you can give it some kind of a direction while you're running it. And if you want some more general advice on how I run encounters, I'll leave a link in a card to some videos where I talk about encounters. Just bear in mind these videos are a little older, long before I actually started adding pixel art and actual video to my videos, so be aware. But I think the content in those videos is still pretty decent, so feel free to check them out. But with social encounters specifically, I like to think, will this encounter evolve into combat? Might it resolve peacefully? And just like always, I think as many alternatives as I can. Again, not so that I can try to predict exactly what will happen, but instead so that I'm ready when something completely different inevitably does end up happening. And lastly, knowing what you're, or at least trying to guess at what your players might do, helps immensely. Think about what the player's goals are and what they want. Does one want to lie to the NPC who accuses them of stealing? Is another someone who always tells the truth? This helps you imagine how the NPC will react and direct the conversation and the encounter. It's easy to say, for example, I want the sludge monster to attack my players, and indeed I used to think like that. But as always, it's our job as DMs to adapt and see where the story goes when everyone is involved. Plus, your players have a lot more freedom this way, and the game generally becomes much more interesting when you keep the options open. But that's it for today. I kept it kind of short and sweet, but I hope that the points that I gave still helped a little bit. Thanks so much for watching, and feel free to check out this week's other video. It's all about a combat encounter that took a hilarious turn, and come back next week where I finally talk about how to run an encounter like a party or a ball, and where I'll tell a story that actually comes immediately after this week's and follows an interesting discovery. I'll go ahead and leave a link in a card to the playlist those stories are on if you want, and to a video that I did recently that's all about large-scale encounters, because parties fall into that category as well, at least how I do them. And of course, thanks again for watching. Feel free to check out the two videos that will appear on your screen here in a minute. Until next time, let's learn something.